There's a rule powerful men follow, but no one talks about it. And the reason you don't see it is exactly why you don't have it. It's not about money, status, or confidence. It's something quieter, something most people ignore every single day. And the more you ignore it, the more power you lose without realizing. The dangerous part? You think you're doing everything right, but you're not. And once you see this rule, you won't be able to unsee it. Most men break this rule in the smallest, most invisible ways. They speak too much when silence would carry more weight. They explain their decisions when no one even questioned them. They rush to clarify, to justify, to make sure they're understood. And on the surface, it feels right, logical even, respectful. But underneath, something else is happening. Every extra word starts to chip away at how people perceive you. Because the moment you feel the need to explain more than necessary, you're no longer just communicating, you're seeking approval. And people can feel that instantly, not consciously, but instinctively. Your tone shifts, your energy changes, you become reactive instead of grounded. And that subtle shift is enough to change how people respond to you. They listen less carefully, they question more, they take your words with less weight, not because you're wrong, but because you don't sound certain. And in any environment, certainty is what creates authority. Without it, even the best ideas lose power. To understand why this happens, you need to look deeper than words, into how people actually interpret behavior. Because in social dynamics, people don't respond to logic first, they respond to signals. And one of the strongest signals you're constantly sending is how much you feel the need to explain yourself. When someone is truly certain about what they're saying, there's no urgency behind it. They speak clearly, directly, and then they stop. That pause creates weight, it creates presence, it signals control. But the moment you start adding more context, more reasons, more justifications, something changes. It no longer feels like clarity, it starts to feel like compensation. And even if people can't explain it, they feel it. Because over-explaining doesn't just share information, it reveals hesitation. And hesitation is interpreted instantly, not as thoughtfulness, but as uncertainty. You may think you're helping others understand you better, but what they're actually picking up on is your need for their agreement. And the moment that need becomes visible, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer the one holding the frame, you're adjusting to theirs. That's the subtle loss of power most people never notice. It doesn't happen through big mistakes. It happens in small moments, when you keep talking after your point is already clear, when you try to cover every angle to avoid being questioned, when you rush to fill silence because it feels uncomfortable. Think about it in real situations. In a meeting, the person who speaks briefly and with clarity often becomes the reference point in the room, not because they said more, but because they didn't feel the need to. Their words land, and the silence that follows gives them weight. Now compare that to someone who keeps explaining, adding more layers, trying to make sure everyone agrees. The longer they speak, the less impact they have. Attention fades, authority weakens, and it's not logical, it's instinctive. The same pattern shows up in everyday interactions. The more you explain your decisions, your intentions, your choices, the more you invite people to analyze you. You open space for doubt. You signal that your position needs support to stand. But when you say what needs to be said and stop, something different happens. There's no visible neediness, no effort to control perception, just clarity. And clarity, when it stands on its own, feels like strength. That's the mechanism most people miss. It's not about speaking less randomly. It's about removing the need to be validated through explanation. And once that need disappears, your entire presence starts to shift.
So, what's the rule powerful men follow that most people ignore? It's simple, but extremely uncomfortable to practice. They don't rush to explain themselves. Not because they're trying to be mysterious, and not because they don't care, but because they don't feel the need to secure approval in every interaction. When they make a decision, they state it, and they stop. No extra layers, no unnecessary justification, no effort to make everyone agree. That restraint is what creates their presence. Most people do the opposite. The moment there's even a hint of doubt from someone else, they start adding more reasons, more context, more explanation, trying to close every gap before it even becomes a question. But in doing that, they unintentionally signal something much louder than their words: uncertainty. And once that signal is there, everything changes. People don't just hear what you're saying, they start evaluating how sure you are about it. And the more you try to convince, the less convinced you seem. Powerful men understand something most people overlook. Silence is not empty, it's loaded. It carries weight, confidence, and control. When you speak and allow space after your words, you're showing that you trust what you said is enough. You're not chasing validation. You're not trying to manage how others perceive you. You're grounded in your position. And that grounded energy is what people respond to. It makes them lean in instead of pull away. It makes them listen instead of question. But this is where it gets difficult, because the moment you stop over-explaining, you'll feel exposed. You'll feel like you need to add more, clarify more, make sure everyone understood. That discomfort is real, and most people immediately try to escape it. They jump back in, fill the silence, soften their stance. But powerful men do something different. They stay in that moment. They let the silence exist, and in doing so, they shift the entire dynamic. Because now, instead of reacting, they're setting the tone. This rule isn't about saying less just for the sake of it. It's about needing less approval, less reassurance, less control over how you're perceived. And once you reach that point, something changes in how people experience you. You become more stable, more certain, more difficult to challenge, not because you're forcing authority, but because you're no longer giving signals that weaken it. And that's the quiet shift that separates those who are heard from those who are respected. Now, the real question is, how do you actually apply this without overthinking every interaction? Because this isn't about becoming cold, distant, or robotic. It's about removing the habits that quietly weaken your presence. The first shift is simple. Stop explaining your decisions when no one asked. If you say you're doing something, let that be enough. The more you automatically justify yourself, the more people train you to expect reasons from you. And once that expectation is set, your words lose independence. Second, when someone questions you, answer but don't defend. Most people hear a question and immediately go into justification mode, stacking reasons to prove they're right. But instead, respond clearly and directly, then stop. Let your answer stand. That pause right after is where your authority is felt, not in the number of arguments you provide. Third, learn to sit with silence. This is where most people fail. The moment there's a gap, they rush to fill it, thinking silence is awkward or negative. But silence is what gives your words weight. It creates tension, presence, and focus. When you remove it, everything you say becomes lighter, easier to ignore. So instead of reacting to silence, start using it. Say what needs to be said and allow space after it. Fourth, stop trying to control how people perceive you. This is the root of over-explaining. The need to be understood, accepted, or agreed with pushes you to add more than necessary. But the more you try to manage perception, the more reactive you become, and people can feel that instantly. When you let go of that need, your communication becomes cleaner, sharper, and more grounded. At first, this shift will feel unnatural. You'll feel the urge to jump back in, to clarify, to make sure everything lands perfectly. But that urge is exactly what has been costing you your power. The moment you resist it, even once, you'll start to notice something different. People won't push as much, they won't question as quickly. And slowly, without forcing anything, the way they respond to you begins to change. At the end of the day, this isn't about communication, it's about identity. Most men think power comes from saying the right things, explaining clearly, or proving their point. But real power comes from something much quieter. It comes from being so certain in your position that you don't feel the need to constantly reinforce it. The moment you stop chasing understanding, people start assuming you already know what you're doing. That's the shift.
Subtle, almost invisible, but powerful. Because when you remove the need for approval, you remove the signals that make others question you. You become harder to read, harder to challenge, and much harder to lower in any dynamic. Not because you're trying to dominate, but because you're no longer reacting. And over time, that becomes your presence. You speak less, but your words carry more. You explain less, but people understand you faster. You do less to prove yourself, but others feel it without you saying a word. That's the silent rule most people ignore, and the reason they struggle to be taken seriously. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, pause. Let the silence do its work. Let your words stand on their own. Because respect isn't given to the man who explains the most, it's given to the one who needs it the least.